My name is Isabella, I'm 29 years old, an ensign in the U.S. Coast Guard, my voice steadying despite the knot in my chest. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I stood at the altar, palms clammy against my white dress, when my grandfather's laughter pierced through the crowd. She'll be an ensign forever. I always said she could command a ship, but I doubt she can command a household. Despite the joy of marrying Alex, the man I loved, I felt a tightness in my chest. At 29, I had fought hard for every scrap of respect in the U.S. Coast Guard, and yet, there was my grandfather, dismissing my accomplishments like a child's minor triumph. I could feel the eyes of the guests shift uncomfortably, and the tension hung thick like a fog. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, surrounded by friends and family, but the echo of his words reverberated through my mind, taunting my self-esteem. I had always looked up to my grandfather, a retired admiral with a voice that boomed like thunder. Now, here he was, making me feel small in front of everyone who'd come to witness this pivotal moment. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, reminding myself I was an officer, a leader, and I wouldn't let his mockery steal my joy today. But that knot in my chest tightened further, and I wanted to scream back, to assert my hard-earned pride, yet I stood frozen, trapped in the expectations of family and tradition. As the ceremony progressed, I tried to focus on Alex, standing there with his warm smile, but my grandfather's laughter replayed in my mind, clashing with the vows we exchanged. I thought about all the nights spent in the barracks, the training missions that tested my limits, and the sacrifices I made to serve my country. Each time I proved myself, it was always overshadowed by someone questioning my abilities simply because I was a woman in uniform. The verses of love and commitment faded into a blur, and my eyes cast downward, fighting back the sting of tears. Then, as if scripted, the moment arrived. Just as I was about to say I do, a sudden rustling from the back of the gathering caught my attention. A wave of uniforms appeared, crisp and sharp, as 300 Coast Guardsmen filed in. I blinked in disbelief, feeling my heart race anew, this time with pride. The sight of them brought a rush of adrenaline, and their disciplined march seemed to drown out my grandfather's earlier remarks. It felt like an affirmation that stretched far beyond my wedding day. These were my brothers and sisters in arms, standing by me, acknowledging my worth. The commanding shout of "Commander" on deck echoed through the air, and I could feel the eyes of every wedding guest shift from me to them. In that moment, a powerful mix of emotions washed over me, and I stood a little taller, my tight chest loosening with each salute they offered. It was a reminder that I was part of something greater, that my service mattered, and that I wasn't just a granddaughter in a white dress. I was Ensign Isabella, proud and steadfast. My grandfather might have mocked me, but I had an entire community behind me, ready to stand in solidarity. And as I looked at Alex, I realized that this wedding wasn't just about him and me, it was a testament to all of us who fought against the odds. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. The ceremony was carefully curated to reflect both James's and my values, blending tradition with the modern touch we both loved. As I stood at the altar, surrounded by the soft hum of the ocean breeze, I tried my best to focus on the man before me. His eyes were full of warmth, the kind of reassurance I needed as the weight of the day pressed down on my shoulders. Yet, there was another weight tugging at my heart, a familiar sense of anxiety that clawed at me from the moment I heard my grandfather's laugh, loud and unmistakable, from the back of the gathering. He had always been the kind of man who thrived in the spotlight, a retired admiral with a rigid demeanor and a reputation for being both intimidating and charismatic. I remembered countless family gatherings where he would command the room, regaling us with tales of his bravery and leadership while I sat there, feeling small yet inspired. But today, at my wedding, it felt like he was only interested in reliving his glory days rather than celebrating my own. Every time I caught his eye, he wore that same smirk, the one that said he disapproved of my choices, my career in the Coast Guard, my decision to marry James. It was nauseating. The officiant was speaking, words meant to be meaningful and life-altering, yet my mind was straying to my grandfather's comments during our last family dinner. A woman in the military? That's not exactly a proper path for a lady. I had argued back then, a fire igniting in my gut as I defended my choices, but I could feel the weight of his disapproval even now. I squeezed James's hand tighter, willing myself to channel my frustration into something constructive, into this moment that should have only been filled with joy. I reminded myself of my training, the resilience we were taught to cultivate, each drill and exercise meant to build my strength, but no amount of preparation could have steeled me against my grandfather's judgment. As I stood there, the moment felt suspended in time. I could hear the ocean waves crashing in the background, a rhythm that somehow focused my thoughts. Our vows were supposed to be the highlight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was stealing the show. My emotions were like a tightly coiled spring, just waiting for the right moment to unravel. While I tried so hard to look serene, internally I was grappling with the fear of disappointing my grandfather, the man I had always wanted to impress. But as much as he loomed over my day, I couldn't let him overshadow the future that lay ahead with James. The moment finally arrived, we exchanged our vows, and it felt both unreal and liberating. Just as I started to relax, basking in the love that surrounded us, the air shifted. I caught sight of my grandfather as he stood, defiantly raising his glass. A wave of whispers cascaded through the audience, leaving a pit in my stomach. A part of me wanted to yell, to confront him, but I bit my tongue, trying instead to focus on James, the connection I cherished. But then, the unexpected happened. As if on cue, 300 Coast Guardsmen who had been gathering behind him suddenly rose to their feet, saluting with a precision that took my breath away. "Commander on deck," they shouted, their voices echoing through the air, drowning out my grandfather's taunts. In that moment of unexpected solidarity, I felt a swell of pride that almost eclipsed the pain of my grandfather's mockery, a reminder that my life in the service had not gone unnoticed, and I was not alone. The hum of the crowd faded, drowning in a tidal wave of disbelief as my grandfather's voice cut through the joyful chaos of my wedding day. I had always felt challenged by him, his expectations as rigid as the metals pinned to his chest. I could still hear that bark, the way he adjusted his glasses, a mere flick of his wrist masking a storm of disappointment. "You're really going to do this?" he had asked, his tone laced with thinly veiled mockery. The laughter of my friends and family morphed into an echoing reminder of how I had never been enough in his eyes. In that moment, surrounded by love and celebration, all I could feel was the weight of his judgment, like an anchor dragging me down into darkness. Flashes of memories danced through my mind, igniting a fire I thought had been extinguished. I was a little girl, trying to impress him at every turn, the ballet recitals, the science fairs, the school plays, all somehow overshadowed by his austere demeanor. I remembered the day I told him I wanted to join the Coast Guard. He had scoffed, as though the very notion was an affront to the family legacy. "Girls don't belong in the military, Isabella," he had said, with such certainty that I had questioned my own dreams. It was these moments that had driven me, pushed me into proving him wrong, but standing there at my wedding, I felt like that little girl again, exposed and vulnerable. As I gathered myself, my eyes drifted toward the Coast Guardsmen who had come to celebrate with me, their uniforms crisp, their stances proud. In that unyielding display of solidarity, I found a haven from my grandfather's scorn. They had witnessed my journey, from a hesitant recruit to an ensign with a commitment to serve. Their support was palpable, it wrapped around me, shielding me from the weight of familial expectations. I remembered the late nights, the training, the moments of self-doubt when I had doubted myself but pushed through anyway. It was then that I realized those men and women standing before me, the ones who shared a common bond forged in duty, had come to honor not just my wedding, but the path I had carved for myself. And then came the moment that shattered the heaviness in the air. "Commander on deck," they shouted in unison, straightening their backs and saluting. The sharpness of their voices cut through the tension like a knife, and the crowd quieted, turning their attention to the spectacle of it all. For a heartbeat, I felt an overwhelming surge of pride. Here were my brothers and sisters in arms, recognizing me not just as Isabella, the bride, but as the commander of my own fate. My heart swelled with a fierce sort of gratitude. I had earned their respect, something my grandfather was still unwilling to grant. In that moment, beneath the weight of my grandfather's disapproval, I found a strength I didn't know I had. The memories of doubt morphed into fuel for my resolve. I stood taller, my eyes brimming with tears, not from sadness, but from a fierce wave of affirmation. The laughter and cheers erupted around me once more, and I realized that regardless of my grandfather's scorn, I was not defined by his expectations. I was defined by my choices, my courage, and the unwavering support of those who truly understood my journey. The memories would always linger, but they would never again have the power to dictate who I was. I still remember the summer days spent at my grandfather's cabin, the air thick with the scent of pine and the murmur of the nearby river. Those times felt simple, yet they were imbued with an unspoken challenge, one I didn't fully grasp until I stood before him on my wedding day. He would often sit on the porch, his calloused hands resting on his knees, effortlessly collecting tales about his days at sea. He was a captain in the Navy, and the pride in his voice was palpable. To him, the uniform wasn't just a suit of fabric, it was a mantle of honor that I was expected to inherit. But the moment I chose the Coast Guard, I felt the storm brewing. "Isabella. You call that a uniform?" he scoffed, his voice booming and laughter echoing through the gathering like a clap of thunder. His words stung, a sharp reminder of the expectations I'd skirted for years. The guests dispersed around us, their faces a mixture of amusement and discomfort. I tried to smile through the humiliation, but my cheeks burned with anger and shame. All I wanted was his approval on one of the most significant days of my life. Instead, he served me a plate of his notorious sarcasm, seasoned with the bitterness of outdated ideals. I had spent my entire life seeking his validation, yet here I was, feeling like a child again. As I glanced at my fiancé, I saw the worry in his eyes. He knew how deeply this mattered to me, how I had fought tooth and nail to carve out my own identity within a lineage steeped in maritime tradition. My achievements, a degree, years of service, felt trivial in the face of my grandfather's derision. I could almost hear my own voice in my head, the one that echoed from my childhood, begging for him to see me as more than just the girl he'd expected to mold into his image of a sailor. I took a deep breath, wanting to let the moment wash over me and somehow turn it into something I could control, but instead, it left me feeling stripped down, raw, and vulnerable. Then, in that sea of laughter and whispers, everything shifted. The Coast Guard contingent stood tall, uniforms crisp and a proud gleam in each of their eyes. One voice boomed above the rest, "Commander on deck." The room froze, and suddenly, all eyes were turned toward my fellow guardsmen, who stood with a reverence that filled the air with electric tension. I felt an unexpected wave of gratitude wash over me. In that moment, it became clearer than ever that my identity didn't merely hinge on my grandfather's approval. Here were my comrades, my family in arms, representing a shared commitment that didn't require a family lineage to validate my worth. Deep down, I knew my grandfather hadn't yet learned to respect my choices, but as I looked at my friends standing resolute, my heart swelled with a different kind of pride, the kind that didn't need a title or family history. The camaraderie I felt among the guardsmen stood in stark contrast to the laughter rising from my grandfather, and I realized something crucial that day: my past didn't define my future. Whether it involved navigating turbulent waters or saying I do, my journey would be my own. The pain of that moment with him would eventually fade, but the strength I found in the faces of my fellow officers assured me that I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the wedding ceremony unfolded, my heart danced uneasily in my chest. I stood there, dressed in white, surrounded by family and friends, yet I felt like an imposter in my own skin. Beyond the romantic vows being exchanged, I could hear my grandfather's voice ringing in my ears from the reception when I was a little girl, mockingly mimicking my dreams of becoming an officer. "What's next, Isabella?" Planning to save the world with a hairpin and a life jacket, he'd laugh, and I'd smile weakly, wishing my aspirations were met with more than just dismissal. Now, juxtaposed against this backdrop of love, I felt the weight of his scorn, mixed with the hope that one day, he would see me for who I truly was. As I glanced at my fiancé, a warmth washed over me, reminding me of the years I'd invested to prove my worth, not just to my grandfather, but to myself. I remembered my first day at the Coast Guard Academy, standing in line among hundreds of hopeful faces, some seasoned by generations of military tradition, while I stood there unsure, questioning if I had what it took to rise above the whispers of doubt that echoed in my mind. I had fought through fatigue and uncertainty, pushing past physical limitations and mental barriers, earning my position day by day, step by step. Each moment in training molded me, but still, those early days remained etched in my memory, haunting me like shadows in the back of my mind. The ceremony continued, and I couldn't help but feel a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I imagined my grandfather's smirk if he could see my uniform beneath this gown, an amalgamation of who I was and who I'd chosen to be. I'd always wanted to be his pride, but I felt like an alien, an outsider trying desperately to fit into a mold he had crafted long before I could even comprehend my ambitions. I was more than just a granddaughter in a wedding dress. I was an ensign in the Coast Guard, driven by the desire to protect and serve, yet haunted by the fear that I'd never be enough in his eyes. Then, just as the moment of exchange drew near, a loud commotion disrupted my thoughts. A group of Coast Guardsmen had entered the venue, 300 strong, lined up in perfect order, crisp uniforms glinting in the sunlight. The crowd parted, and I felt a jolt of recognition and pride surge through me. Their presence was electric, a demonstration of the honor and keen discipline that coursed through my life. A voice boomed, "Commander on deck," and the air shifted as they stood at attention, saluting. In that moment, I felt a tidal wave of affirmation crash over me. These men and women, my brothers and sisters, had no idea I was being married right there, but for me, they represented everything I had worked for. They were my comrades who believed in something bigger than themselves, something that transcended sneers and derogatory laughter. I finally looked for my grandfather in the crowd, waiting for a reaction, almost daring him to snicker. But instead, his face shifted from surprise to respect as he witnessed this sea of salute honoring me. My heart raced. My path, once a source of ridicule, had manifested into something momentous. I was here, standing on the threshold of love, with the unwavering support of those who truly understood my journey. No longer just a girl with dreams, I was a proud ensign molding my destiny. Perhaps even my grandfather would understand, if only just a little, that I had risen to be worth much more than a hairpin and a life jacket. The sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass, when I stood there in my wedding dress, feeling like a fish out of water. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind, sharp and scornful, drowning out the laughter of my friends and the music that filled the air. "You really think this is what it means to be a woman, Isabella? Dressed up for some boy?" His disdainful chuckle felt like a slap, igniting a flame of anger that threatened to engulf me. I was supposed to be celebrating one of the happiest days of my life, yet his voice lingered like a storm cloud, casting a pall over everything. I took a deep breath and let the cool evening breeze wash over me, trying to ground myself in the moment. Here I was, a proud ensign in the Coast Guard, a woman who had fought battles, both at sea and in life. I had dedicated years to my service, earning respect from my peers and superiors, but none of that seemed to matter to him. His traditional views weighed heavily on me, battling with the love I felt for my soon-to-be husband, Marcus, who stood by my side, his hand warm and reassuring in mine. I turned to him, seeing the kindness in his eyes, and felt a swell of defiance rise within me. In that instant, I realized that my wedding was not just about uniting two people, it was a celebration of everything I had fought for. I had overcome challenges that would have made most people crumble. Those grueling months of training, the relentless physical and mental tests, and the sacrifices of being away from home, all of it had shaped me into the woman I was today. I wasn't just a girl in a dress, I was a commander in my own life, someone who had earned not just a rank, but a place in a world that often tried to silence me. As I prepared to walk down the aisle, I could feel the nervous energy of the crowd, but beneath that, there was a current of respect. My heart raced, not from fear, but from an exhilarating sense of purpose. I could see the Coast Guard representatives in their uniforms, standing tall among our friends and family, and I felt a connection to them that overshadowed my grandfather's ridicule. They had stood by me through countless missions, and at that moment, I felt their support bolster my resolve. I took a step forward, feeling the fabric of my dress trail behind me, a reminder that I was not just stepping into a new relationship but also standing tall in my identity. The moment arrived when I reached the altar. Just as I looked into Marcus's eyes, the crowd shifted. 300 Coast Guardsmen, impeccably dressed in their uniforms, stood at attention. "Commander on deck," they boomed, their voices echoing like cannon fire, shattering the remnants of my grandfather's ridicule. My chest tightened with emotion as they saluted. I attempted to catch my breath, overwhelmed by the weight of their respect, and in that second, I understood the magnitude of the journey I had undertaken. I was not alone. I was surrounded by those who recognized my worth. I felt a surge of pride, knowing that I belonged to something greater, and that my identity as a strong, determined woman was just as important as this beautiful day. This was not a moment of weakness, this was my moment, and I was ready to embrace it. I stood nervously at the altar, the morning sun shining down on my crisp white dress. The energy in the air felt electric, a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. There had been countless moments leading up to this day where I questioned everything that had brought me here. My grandfather's mocking words echoed in my mind, a sardonic reminder of the tension between who I was and what he expected of me. Yet, standing there in my dress uniform, I felt the weight of my achievements. Each step along my journey had been engraved into my very being, like the stripes on my sleeve. I had fought hard to wear this uniform with pride, and today I would not let his jibes undermine my happiness. As I said my vows, I could feel the presence of my fellow Coast Guardsmen behind me, their steadfastness a comforting balm. They had witnessed my struggles, my growth, and the determination that had propelled me forward despite every obstacle. I remembered when I first joined, the steely determination I held inside that often collided with the doubts cast by others, including my grandfather. I had endured grueling training, physical and mental tests designed to break me, yet each time I had pushed through. I had learned that persistence was not just a choice, it was a necessity, a survival mechanism that allowed me to carve my own path in a world that often seemed stacked against me. As I looked into the eyes of my soon-to-be husband, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for all that had brought me there. His unwavering support was a golden anchor in my life, steadying me when the waves of self-doubt threatened to pull me under. I could hear my grandfather's laughter in the distance, but it felt distant now, like a faint memory I was learning to rise above. I had made choices that were true to my heart, choices that my grandfather could never understand. I had forged bonds with the men and women in my unit that were deeper than blood, and I acknowledged that those connections were my foundation. I was no longer the girl he depicted, lost in a world of make-believe. I was a commander of my own destiny. When the ceremony concluded and my husband and I stepped into our new life together, I felt a surge of pride fill me. We were greeted by cheers and applause, but it was the sight of my fellow service members standing tall that sent a jolt of courage through me. They straightened their posture and saluted with a precision that reminded me of all we had accomplished together. "Commander on deck," they bellowed, their voices a harmonious reminder of where I had come from. In that moment, I felt the past lift away. I saw not just myself but the collective strength of those who had fought alongside me. Each salute was a tribute, a testament to our shared resilience, our commitment, and our unyielding spirit. As I turned to face my husband, a smile spread across my face, fueled by the love and acceptance that filled my heart. I realized that I had broken free from the shadows of others' expectations, ready to embrace a life that was uniquely my own. My grandfather's mockery had ignited something within me, an insatiable desire to prove myself, to thrive beyond the confines of his traditional mindset. I understood that this journey would not always be easy, there would be challenges ahead, both in my personal and professional life. But with the strength of my service in the Coast Guard, the bonds with my comrades, and the love of my husband fueling me, I felt invincible. I was finally ready to embrace the future, ready to define success on my own terms. As I stood in line with my fellow officers, the weight of my uniform felt heavier than usual. The sun beat down mercilessly, and despite its warmth, a chill crept through me, igniting the raw edges of my grief. It had only been a few weeks since I lost my grandmother, the matriarch of our family, the one who had seen me through every trial and triumph. With her, I had shared pieces of my heart, pieces that now felt irretrievably fragmented. The day of my wedding should have been filled with joy, but the absent warmth of her presence turned it into a bittersweet memory, a ghostly reminder of the love I had lost. The ceremonial hall was decorated beautifully, but every ribbon and floral arrangement dulled against the stark reality of my sorrow. I could hear the laughter and excited chatter of our friends and families, but they felt miles away, a world I could no longer fully belong to. I caught glimpses of my grandfather, a man whose pride had once filled my heart with warmth, yet today he carried a contempt that stung sharper than any insult. His mockery, aimed at my chosen path in the Coast Guard, felt like a knife twisting deeper with every glance. His disdain was louder than the vows I was about to take, drowning out the sacred promises I was determined to uphold. As I walked down the aisle, my heart raced not with joy but with the tumult of anger and hurt. I was stepping into my future, yet haunted by the past. I wanted to feel the joy of the moment, to bask in the love of my fiancé, but instead, the bitterness of my grandfather's words echoed in my mind. How could he belittle what I had worked so hard for? Yet beneath that anger lay a painful truth. I yearned for his acceptance, a shred of pride that I knew would never come. Every step made me question whether I was strong enough to bear the weight of his disapproval alongside my own grief. Then, as we reached the altar, the air shifted. The moment my fiancé clasped my hands and spoke the words I had longed to hear, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. I could see the faces in the crowd, a sea of support and love, and for the first time that day, I felt a flicker of light piercing through the veil of darkness. But right then, as vows were exchanged, the doors swung open, and in walked 300 Coast Guardsmen in crisp, ironed uniforms, their presence commanding silence. "Commander on deck," the call rang out, and in that instant, everything else faded away. In that moment, I was no longer just a granddaughter standing in the shadow of her grandfather's derision. I was Isabella, ensign in the U.S. Coast Guard, surrounded by my own. They stood straight, proud and resolute, and I could feel the spirits of those I had lost re-entering my heart. My grandmother would have loved this, the camaraderie and unity, the feeling of being part of something larger than myself. The mockery from my grandfather became just a whisper in the background, drowned by the chorus of respect and honor from my comrades. I realized then that grief and love could coexist, each a part of me, every layer intertwined. In that sacred moment, amidst my wedding vows, I understood that I was not defined by my grandfather's judgment but by my own strength and the love that surrounded me. I stood there, frozen for a moment, absorbing the overwhelming scene as the first rays of the setting sun filtered through the trees, casting a golden hue over my wedding day. The laughter and clinking of glasses faded into a soft background hum, muffled by the sudden rush of adrenaline and disbelief that coursed through my veins. It wasn't the wedding I had envisioned, not with my grandfather's voice ringing in my ears, mocking my commitment, calling me a fool for choosing duty over tradition. But how could I let that taint this day? I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the weight of his words, reminding myself that today was about love, courage, and the people who stood by me. Just as I began to gather my thoughts, the unmistakable, synchronized sound of boots striking the ground caught my attention. I turned, my heart racing, as I saw the formation of Coast Guardsmen who had come to honor me. The sight of them, dark uniforms sharp against the backdrop of the floral arrangements, filled me with a rush of pride that spilled over the uncertainty my grandfather had cast. These were not just colleagues, they were my brothers and sisters, the ones who had shared the weight of responsibility with me, who had seen me struggle and triumph through every challenge. Their presence was a declaration that resonated deep within me, grounding me in my identity. "Commander on deck." The shout rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the chatter and pulling every head toward the formation. I felt my cheeks heat up as I instinctively brought my hand to my brow in a crisp salute, feeling the weight of their respect and camaraderie wash over me. These moments, as someone in the service, are etched in a different way. It wasn't about being the center of attention for the day, it was about recognition, a shared acknowledgement of the path I had walked to get here and the struggles we had all faced together. It was in that instant that I understood my grandfather's scoffing was irrelevant. Here, I was seen for who I truly was, and that recognition steadied my nerves. Each of those Coast Guardsmen held a piece of my history, a story of resilience, dedication, and sacrifice. We had been through rough seas together, literally and figuratively. I remembered the late nights, the exhaustion that tested our limits, the moments when our very lives depended on trust, on knowing that we had each other's backs. As they stood in formation, their stern expressions softened, and I could see the warmth in their eyes. It was a reminder that the bonds we forged in service transcended anything familial. They had watched me grow not just as an officer but as a person, and I couldn't help but smile through the tears that brimmed in my eyes. As I turned to face my husband, who wore a mix of surprise and pride, I felt a renewed sense of confidence surge within me. The harsh words and judgments from my grandfather faded, no longer holding power over me. My heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the love I was committing to today, but for the community that had lifted me up in my stead. In a world that often left women like me doubted and dismissed, these men and women stood as a testament to my journey, cheering me on at the intersection of my life as both an officer and a bride. Life had its complexities, but in this moment, I felt anchored. I had made choices that mattered, and I would continue to forge my path, not alone, but surrounded by those who truly understood. The church was filled with laughter and sunlight, but my heart was a storm cloud. I stood there in my wedding dress, a pristine white that felt heavy with the weight of expectations, my parents' hopes, my fiancé's dreams, and my grandfather's mockery. Just a day ago, he'd leaned in close, his breath laced with whiskey, and whispered that marrying a man in uniform was a waste of my potential. It was a throwaway comment, but it burrowed under my skin, the sting lingered longer than I anticipated. The ceremony was supposed to be a celebration, a culmination of love, yet it felt like I was walking towards a confrontation with every step down the aisle. When I reached the altar, my fiancé beamed at me, radiating undiluted adoration that felt like a balm to my anxious heart. He had always supported me, urging me to chase my dreams in the Coast Guard, to embrace the challenges. But even his smile couldn't quiet the echo of my grandfather's words ringing in my ears. The officiant began, but I found myself drifting, my mind returning to that gruff voice mocking the very life I had chosen. How could I let him make me doubt my worth, my path? My resolve hardened as I listened, the vows transforming into a mantra in my mind, a shield against the venom of my family's disbelief. Just as we reached the part where we promised to love and cherish one another, I glanced toward the back of the church. There he was, my grandfather, an immovable stone in his well-worn suit. I felt a surge of defiance boiling up inside me. He was here, in a place that should have held nothing but joy, reducing my marriage to a point of ridicule. My heart pounded as I envisioned him crumbling my dreams with his dismissive laughter. In that moment, the weight of his disapproval was unbearable, and I realized I needed to confront it head-on, even if it was right in front of everyone I loved. With my pulse racing, I turned to face my audience, feeling the warmth of supportive gazes, my fiancé's unwavering strength beside me. To my surprise, the sea of faces shifted, and there was an unmistakable presence among them, 300 Coast Guardsmen, their uniforms crisp and proud. It felt like a tidal wave of unity enveloping me, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. "Commander on deck," one of them shouted, and suddenly, the atmosphere changed. The men stood tall, saluting in perfect synchronization, a declaration of respect that echoed the pride I had always felt serving alongside them. Their solidarity struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a mixture of gratitude and fierce determination rise. My grandfather's expression twisted from arrogance to confusion, a flicker of surprise in his eyes as if he were suddenly standing at the edge of a precipice. I took a deep breath and turned back to face my fiancé, locking eyes with him. With a simple nod from him, I felt a surge of courage. This was my moment, not just to marry but to assert my identity, a woman in the Coast Guard, a partner, and ultimately, a strong, independent individual. As I recited my vows, the words bore the weight of my truth, of every struggle I'd faced and every doubt I'd overcome. The mockery would not overshadow my joy. This was my life, filled with love and purpose, far beyond the constraints of my grandfather's perception. The moment was mine, and I was ready to embrace it fully, come what may. As I stood at the altar, my heart thudded like a drum in my chest, drowning out the serenity of the coastal breeze. My grandfather's laughter still echoed in my mind, a brazen mockery of my uniform, of my dedication to the Coast Guard, his disdain palpable even amidst the smiles of my loved ones. I had spent so many years trying to prove to him that being a woman in the military didn't make me less of a granddaughter, less of a woman altogether. But there he was, shaking his head, as if my accomplishments were nothing more than a child's dreams. It stung more than I cared to admit, especially on a day meant to celebrate love and unity. The ceremony moved around me in a blur, the officiant speaking words of joy and hope that I hardly heard. I gripped my fiancé's hand tightly, grounding myself in his presence, but my thoughts kept drifting back to my grandfather. I wanted so badly for him to see me as I saw myself, strong, capable, and deserving of respect. Yet all I could think about was how often his words had hung over me like a dark cloud. Did he really believe I would fail? Did he think my dreams were simply a phase, an illusion of grandeur that would vanish with time? As the moment approached for us to exchange vows, a sense of uncertainty gnawed at me, threatening to cloud what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. And then, just when I thought I would drown in the weight of his judgment, the doors swung open, and in marched over 300 Coast Guardsmen, their crisp uniforms gleaming under the sun, marching in perfect formation. My breath caught in my throat as the sound of boots hitting the floor reverberated through the air. They came to a halt before me, a sea of proud faces that somehow pulled me back into the moment. Saluting sharply, they declared, "Commander on deck." My heart leapt, and for a moment I was transported to the ocean's edge, the salt spray in my face, the endless horizon stretching out before me. I felt the camaraderie, the shared commitment, and the respect that was so often missing from my grandfather's world. Suddenly, I wasn't just the girl in a white dress, I was an ensign, a leader, a member of something bigger than myself. My mind flicked back to the conversation I had with my grandfather just weeks before. I had stood firm in my conviction, telling him that my life was my own, that I was proud to serve, proud to lead. No longer was I the little girl seeking his approval. I had forged my own path with every challenge I overcame. The sight of my comrades, the support and solidarity pulsing through me, reminded me that I belonged to a family that transcended blood. Instead, it was bound by service and sacrifice. As I turned to my fiancé, our eyes locked, and in that instant, I knew this was more than just a wedding. This was my statement to the world, to my grandfather, and anyone else who doubted me. I wasn't here to prove myself, I was here to celebrate who I had become. I could see the flicker of realization in my grandfather's expression as he recognized the strength in the community I had chosen over his disapproval. The barriers that had kept us apart began to crack ever so slightly. I took a deep breath, feeling grounded amidst the proud faces in uniform and the love surrounding me. I was standing tall in my truth, and finally, I felt free. Standing under the vast, open sky, I finally felt free. It was a stark contrast to the weight I had carried for so long, the expectation to conform to a mold shaped by my grandfather's mockery and others who belittled my aspirations. I had fallen into their trap of needing their approval, yearning for their validation as though it were a currency I could trade for respect. But at that moment, surrounded by the brave and proud members of my Coast Guard family, I understood that I no longer needed their approval. I was an ensign, a leader, and most importantly, I was enough, just as I was. The echoes of laughter from my wedding day floated through my mind, making me both cringe and smile. My grandfather's derisive remarks as I walked down the aisle felt like a distant thunderstorm, but instead of dampening my spirits, they turned my resolve into a lightning bolt of defiance. Each chord of his voice was a reminder of the weight I had cast off, the oppressive chains of familial expectations that had long held me captive. In that moment, I realized that my path, filled with discipline and struggle, was not defined by their scorn but by the honor and camaraderie I found within my chosen family. The moment the 300 Coast Guardsmen stood and saluted at my command felt like a movie scene unfolding. It was surreal and magnificent. Amidst a sea of crisp white uniforms, their salutes were not just a formality, they were a proclamation of my worth. The air was electrified with their respect, and I could feel every heartbeat reverberate through my chest, anchoring me in the reality that I was exactly where I belonged. Their unwavering support transformed what could have been a day shadowed by doubt into a celebration of my journey, empowering me to step boldly into my future without fear. In that powerful salute, I found a mirror reflecting not just my commitment to serving my country but also the strength I had cultivated over years of proving myself. I remembered the nights spent studying, the early mornings spent training, and the countless times I had to silence the voices that told me I would fail. Each challenge I faced had been a stepping stone, carving away the insecurities and revealing the resilient woman I had become. I felt a surge of gratitude wash over me, not only for my fellow servicemen and women but also for the lessons learned through adversity. As I stood there, my heart swelling with pride, I looked up at the endless sky above, the sun casting a warm glow over the ocean waves. In that moment, I visualized the horizon ahead, a vast expanse of opportunities waiting for me to explore. I was no longer bound by the expectations of others. I was a commander on deck, charting my own course. The journey was far from over, but I was ready to embrace it fully, buoyed by the knowledge that I had found my place among those who believed in me. And as I inhaled deeply, a newfound sense of purpose infused my spirit, as fierce and unyielding as the ocean itself. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.